Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in your life when you have to stop rehearsing your worries and start remembering God's record. I came here today not to tell you what might happen, but to remind you of what's already happening in the Spirit. God is already handling it. See, I know what it's like to toss and turn at night, trying to strategize your way out of a storm, trying to fix something that's already been claimed by grace. But what if I told you that your overthinking is not a sign of control, it's a symptom of mistrust? God said, be still and know that I am God, and not be busy, and not be worried, and not overanalyze every outcome. He said, be still. Because he's already moving, he's already shifting, he's already healing and restoring and making a way. So today, we're going to break the cycle of doubt, we're going to unlearn the habit of fear, and we're going to stand in the truth that God is already handling it. Faith doesn't require evidence, it requires surrender. That's a hard truth when you've spent your whole life being told to prove, to perform, to prepare. We are trained to analyze, to investigate, to wait until we see a sign before we make a move, but faith doesn't operate in the realm of sight. Faith says move even when you're blind. Faith says trust even when there is no confirmation. Faith is not about being comfortable. It's about being confident in a God you cannot see, but whose presence you know deep in your soul. We often say we have faith, but what we really mean is we're okay with trusting God. As long as He tells us the plan, we want to know the when, the how, and the why before we surrender. We want the spreadsheet of heaven's timeline, the PowerPoint of divine details. But God doesn't give us blueprints. He gives us promises and promises don't come with tracking numbers. They require trust. Surrender is the soul's response to divine interruption. It's what you do when you stop trying to control the narrative and start yielding to the author. Surrender isn't weak, it's wild, it's radical, it's disruptive. It means letting go of your backup plan. It means releasing your own wisdom. It means saying, God, even if I don't understand, even if I'm afraid, even if this doesn't make sense, I choose you over clarity. Because clarity is comfortable, but it can become a crutch. Sometimes God has to blind you to the details so you can learn to walk by faith and not by sight. Faith doesn't wait for feelings to align, it moves in spite of them. You can be shaking and still be surrendered. You can have questions and still choose obedience. God isn't waiting for you to feel fearless. He's waiting for you to say yes, with trembling hands and a heart that's learning how to trust. Surrender says, God, I'm available, and not, God, I'm ready. Because truthfully, you'll never feel ready for what He's really calling you to do. The call is always bigger than your comfort zone. It's supposed to be. That's how God shows up strong in your weakness. We confuse faith with evidence because we've grown used to proving ourselves. Maybe life taught you that love had to be earned, that value had to be demonstrated, that success had to be visible. So now you apply that same logic to God, but God isn't like people. He doesn't ask for your resume. He asks for your yes. He doesn't wait until you've figured it all out. He steps into your chaos and says, follow me. And when you take that step, not because you know what's coming, but because you trust who's calling, you're walking in real faith. We say we want God's will, but often we want it to look like our plan. But real surrender means giving up not just control, but preference. It means trusting that even if the route is unfamiliar, the destination is still divine, that God's detour is still direction, that what looks like delay is actually protection. When you surrender, you stop treating uncertainty as punishment and start seeing it as preparation. It's easy to trust God with what you understand, but faith lives in the realm of mystery, and mystery is messy. It rarely looks organized, it doesn't always feel holy, but faith doesn't need neatness. It needs willingness. Surrender is when you stop needing the path to make sense and start trusting the one who made the path. So many of us are waiting for confirmation when God is waiting for commitment. We're waiting for signs in the sky while God is asking for steps on the ground. There's a difference between testing God and trusting Him. And sometimes your overthinking is just fear dressed up like wisdom. It sounds smart, but really it's hesitation. It sounds cautious, but really it's control, and God is calling you out of that cycle. He's not asking you to analyze. He's asking you to agree because faith is not a debate. It's a decision. Faith without surrender is just admiration. You can admire God's power, His beauty, His miracles. But until you surrender, you won't experience the fullness of it. Surrender is what activates the supernatural. It opens the door for God to do what only He can do, but as long as you're holding the reins, you're limiting what He can release. Faith is not about inviting God into your plan, it's about stepping into His. Overthinking is the enemy of obedience. It doesn't come dressed like a thief. It comes dressed like caution, like wisdom, like preparation. It sounds like I just need more time, or I'm just being realistic, or let me make sure everything is lined up first. But what it's really doing is keeping you in a cycle of hesitation that God never called you to live in. When God speaks, He's not looking for delay. He's looking for response. And the longer you sit in the swirl of what-ifs and how-comes and what-abouts, the more you train your spirit to ignore the voice of God and obey the voice of fear. Overthinking feels like control, but it's rooted in fear. It's that part of your mind that needs every angle calculated before taking a step. But obedience doesn't always come with a full map. Sometimes God gives you one word, one nudge, one instruction. And when you overthink that, you start building arguments against the very thing God already gave you peace about. You start inviting confusion into what was once clarity. The longer you analyze, the more likely you are to paralyze the move of God in your life. Because God isn't obligated to explain Himself. He's inviting you to trust Him. Think about how many blessings have been delayed, not because God wasn't ready, but because we weren't obedient. Not because the door wasn't open, but because we wouldn't walk through it. Overthinking builds imaginary barriers around opportunities that were already yours. It whispers lies in your ear that say, you're not ready, you'll fail, what if it doesn't work? And so instead of walking in purpose, we sit in procrastination disguised as planning. But delayed obedience is still disobedience, and while you're stuck trying to figure it all out, God is still waiting for your yes. Obedience isn't about having all the details, it's about trusting the direction. And trust doesn't mean you won't feel fear. It means you won't let fear make your decisions. Some of us are praying for God to speak again when we still haven't moved on the last word He gave us. We're asking for new instructions when we've buried the last ones under layers of doubt and analysis. Overthinking causes you to miss divine moments because you're looking for logic in places where only faith can operate. When God told Abraham to leave everything he knew and go to a land He would show him, there were no GPS coordinates. No list of pros and cons, no 5-year plan, just a word, and Abraham moved. Not because it made sense, but because he trusted the voice that called him. He didn't overthink it, he obeyed it, and because of that obedience, a whole nation was birthed. What if your obedience is tied to someone else's breakthrough? What if your yes releases something not just for you, but for your family, your generation, your community? Overthinking will make you think it's just about you. But obedience ripples, it has legacy written all over it, and every moment you spend going back and forth in your mind is a moment that divine momentum is being stalled. The spirit of overthinking often masks itself as wisdom, but godly wisdom is not hesitant, it is bold and assured. When God gives a word, it may not make sense to your natural mind, but it will always resonate with your spirit. Overthinking is what happens when you ignore your spirit and give your fear a microphone. It amplifies every possible failure, every past mistake, every unknown variable. It rehearses scenarios that will probably never happen and convinces you that caution is safer than courage. But obedience is rarely safe, it's sacred. Sometimes you have to move even while your mind is racing. You have to act while the questions still echo, because God doesn't require a clear mind. He requires a willing heart. Overthinking often begins where trust ends. And the more space you give to your thoughts, the less space you leave for God to move. You can't surrender and control at the same time. You can't say, God, lead me, and then argue every turn. At some point, you have to decide that obedience is your priority, not understanding. God is not asking for perfection. He's asking for participation. He's asking for you to stop waiting until it all makes sense and just step, because every step of obedience breaks the grip of overthinking. Every move you make in faith silences the lies that say you're not enough. Obedience is not passive, it's aggressive. It tears down the strongholds of fear. It shuts down the noise of doubt, it says. Even if I don't know what's next, I know who's leading. God's silence is not his absence. That's a truth we often forget when we're sitting in the middle of uncertainty, praying with everything we've got, and all we hear is quiet. There's something about silence that feels like rejection. It feels like maybe God forgot, maybe he's ignoring you, maybe you missed something, but silence isn't always a no. Sometimes it's a strategy. Sometimes God steps back not because he's gone, but because he's teaching you how to walk without constantly needing to hear his voice. We've been conditioned to equate movement with proof and noise with presence. If we don't feel something, if we don't hear something, we assume nothing's happening. But that's not how God works. God is just as present in the whisper as he is in the thunder, just as intentional in the pause as he is in the miracle. His silence is not a void, it's a space where faith is grown. It's where you learn to trust him, not for what he says in the moment, but for what he promised long before the silence began. We cry out for answers, and when they don't come fast enough, we begin to doubt. We begin to wonder if maybe he changed his mind, if maybe he's disappointed in us, if maybe the promise expired. But what if the silence isn't about punishment? It's about preparation. What if God is cultivating something in you that can only be developed in quiet? What if he's strengthening your roots, deepening your endurance, so that when the answer finally comes, you're mature enough to carry it? The silence of God is not empty. It's full of his intention, full of his hand working behind the scenes in ways you can't see. You may not hear him, but he's positioning people, rearranging circumstances, refining your character. Silence doesn't mean inactivity. It means the process is sacred. It means he's doing something in you before he does something for you, and sometimes the silence is actually the sound of trust being built in your heart, brick by brick. We often want God to speak to our now, but he's already spoken to our future. He's not silent because he has nothing to say. He's silent because he already gave the word, and now he's watching to see if you'll believe it even when you can't hear it repeated. Faith is not measured by how well you hear, it's measured by how well you trust when there's nothing left but the memory of the last thing he said. Think of Jesus in the wilderness, after being affirmed by the Father at his baptism, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." He was led by the Spirit into a season of testing, 40 days, no affirmation, no signs, just silence, and in that silence the enemy came, because silence creates space for questions. But notice this, Jesus didn't crumble. He didn't second guess. He stood on what was already spoken. He didn't need a fresh word. He trusted the last one. That's what faith looks like in silence. That's the kind of obedience that grows deep. Some of the strongest moments of your spiritual life will be the ones where you had no fresh word, no goosebumps, no confirmation, just raw trust, just the memory of what he promised and the decision to believe it anyway. That's the kind of faith that moves mountains. Not the kind that needs signs every step of the way, but the kind that says, "God, I may not feel you, but I know you're with me. I may not hear you, but I believe you're working. I may not see the evidence, but I know you're faithful." Silence teaches us how to walk. It teaches us how to hold onto the character of God when we can't trace the hand of God. It strips away the crutches we've leaned on and forces us to depend on what we know asterisk, not what we feel asterisk. And sometimes the silence reveals our true posture, whether we're following God because of what he says or because of who he is, whether we're seeking his voice or his heart. God's silence is often the space between the seed and the harvest. It's the quiet before the breakthrough. It's the stillness before the suddenly. And if you can endure it, if you can remain faithful in it, you'll come out of it stronger, clearer, more anchored than before. Because the silence didn't break you, it built you, it prepared you for what you couldn't have handled before. Peace comes when you release what you can't control. But most of us are holding onto things with clenched fists, trying to manage every outcome, monitor every person, and manipulate every possibility. We call it responsibility, but deep down it's fear. Fear that if we let go, things will fall apart. Fear that if we're not on top of everything, something will go wrong. So we carry weight we were never meant to carry, stress we weren't built to handle, and pressure that's silently stealing our peace. Peace isn't found in the fixing. It's found in the surrender. It's not something you create by figuring everything out. It's something you receive when you finally say, God, I trust you more than I trust my plan. That moment of release, that internal letting go, is what allows peace to enter. Because peace doesn't live in the same space as control. It waits outside until you clear a space for it by handing things over to God. We often pray for peace but hold on to chaos. We say we want rest, but we keep wrestling. We ask God to step in, then take the reins back the moment we feel uncomfortable. But real peace doesn't require everything around you to change. It requires you to change. It requires a shift in posture where you stop obsessing over things you can't predict, control, or force and start trusting that God is sovereign in the spaces you can't see. Sometimes we think peace means the absence of problems, but peace is really the presence of God in the middle of the storm. It's the stillness of heart when everything around you is uncertain. It's the quiet confidence that says, even if it doesn't go the way I thought, God still got me. That kind of peace isn't found in books or strategies. It's found at the feet of Jesus. It's found when you let go of your need to know and start leaning into his ability to lead. There's a cost to control. It costs you your sleep. It costs you your joy. It costs you your energy and your clarity. Control will drain you dry and leave you anxious because it keeps you living in a future that hasn't happened yet. It traps your mind in constant what-ifs, running through every scenario as if your worry has the power to shift reality. But worry doesn't change the future. It just corrupts your present, and God never asked you to carry what only he can hold. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means giving over. It means placing what you can't manage into the hands of the one who never fails. It's saying, God, this is bigger than me, but it's not bigger than you. And in that transfer, peace comes. Not because the situation has changed yet, but because your soul finally found rest in knowing it's not all on you. You were never designed to carry the full weight of life. You were created to walk in partnership with a God who carries burdens with grace. Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." That's not just poetic, it's a promise, but the rest doesn't come to those who keep managing everything. It comes to those who come to him, who are willing to trade anxiety for assurance, who lay their fears down long enough for peace to rise up. That trade doesn't happen through striving. It happens through surrender. There's freedom in saying, I don't have control over this. Not because you're helpless, but because you're finally being honest. Because it takes more strength to release than to hold on. Real peace starts where your grip ends. It's found in the gap between your limitations and God's limitless power. And until you get comfortable with not knowing, not planning every detail, not orchestrating every moment, you'll always feel the tension that control brings. Peace is not passive, it's powerful. It guards your heart. It anchors your mind. It silences the noise of fear and replaces it with divine assurance. But that kind of peace only flows into hands that are open. God can't fill what you won't let go of. As long as you're clinging to outcomes, people, timelines, or control, you're closing the door to the very peace you're praying for. Letting go isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's the moment you decide that God's plan is better than your pressure, and that your soul is more valuable than your strategy. You can't hold the promise and the problem at the same time. One will always pull your attention more than the other, and if you're constantly rehearsing the problem, you'll start forgetting the promise. If you're gripping the weight of what's not working, what's not fixed, what still looks broken, then you're not making room to receive the fullness of what God has already declared over your life. There's a divine tension between holding on to faith and letting go of fear, and you have to decide which one you're going to feed. It's not that the problem isn't real. The problem is often loud, visible, and persistent. But the promise is eternal. The problem demands your reaction. The promise requires your belief. One changes how you feel, the other changes how you live. And if you're not intentional, you'll keep living from a place of reaction instead of a place of revelation. But the promise doesn't come to pass because you keep worrying about it. It comes to pass when you trust the one who made it, even when the problem still looks like it's winning. We try to balance both. We say we believe in God's promise, but we still spend our nights anxious. We declare victory, but then strategize as if we're already defeated. We want to walk in faith, but we keep rehearsing the facts. You don't need to deny the facts to stand on the truth. The truth is, God's word outweighs your reality, but your focus determines what grows. If you keep watering the problem, it'll become the only thing you see. And soon the promise will feel like a fantasy instead of your future. God never asked us to carry both. He asked us to choose. He said, "Cast your cares on me," and not carry them beside my word. You weren't designed to drag the problem and the promise through your life like twin weights. At some point, you have to release the problem long enough to fully embrace the promise, because what you carry will shape how you walk. If you're carrying fear, you'll walk with hesitation. If you're carrying disappointment, you'll walk with guarded hope. But if you're carrying the promise, you'll walk with expectancy, even when the evidence isn't visible yet. Some of us have gotten so familiar with our problems that we've built our identity around them. We've named ourselves by our trauma, our loss, our failure. So even when the promise comes knocking, we struggle to open the door because we're still living under the label of what hurt us. But God doesn't call you by your pain. He calls you by your purpose. The problem is part of the process, but it's not your identity. And you have to decide whether you're going to live rooted in what went wrong or rise up into what's already been spoken over your life. The promise doesn't require perfection. It requires positioning. You have to position your heart to believe even when your mind still has questions. That means turning down the volume on doubt. That means getting quiet enough to hear the whisper of God louder than the shout of your circumstances. Because the enemy knows if he can keep you problem-focused, he can keep you paralyzed. But when you start leaning into the promise, you start moving different. You start praying different. You start expecting different. When the Israelites left Egypt, they carried the memory of slavery with them, even as they walked toward the land God had promised. God had already declared freedom, already prepared the way, already planned their victory. But their minds were still trapped in what they came out of. That's what the problem does. It echoes in your thoughts until you forget that freedom is already yours. And even though the land was theirs, their fear kept them wandering. They were holding on to the past while trying to step into the future, but you can't occupy the promise while still living in the shadow of the problem. The promise will stretch you. It will require you to let go of some narratives you've lived with for a long time. It will challenge your comfort zone. It will invite you to trust again even after heartbreak, to believe again even after disappointment. But you can't do that with one hand holding the problem and the other trying to reach for the promise. God is asking for both hands, for your full attention, for your surrendered heart, because when you let go of the problem, not only are your hands free, you're finally ready to receive everything He's been waiting to give. Sometimes the breakthrough comes after the release. Not after the strategy, not after the plan, not after you've figured it all out, but after the release. That moment when you stop trying to force it, stop trying to fix it, stop trying to understand every piece of it, and you just surrender. That's when things start shifting, because breakthrough doesn't respond to control, it responds to faith. And faith doesn't always look like movement. Sometimes it looks like letting go and trusting that God knows what He's doing even when you don't see a single sign. We think breakthrough is something we chase, something we earn through hustle and perfect prayers. But more often, breakthrough meets you when your heart is finally free of the weight you were never meant to carry. It shows up in the quiet places, in the moments of deep release where you say, "God, I can't do this in my strength anymore." That's not weakness, that's worship. That's when you shift from striving to surrender, and in that shift, heaven starts moving. We live in a world that glorifies control. Control your time, your emotions, your image, your outcomes, but God's kingdom moves differently. The ones who see breakthrough are not always the ones who push the hardest, but the ones who release the deepest. The ones who aren't afraid to say, God, if this isn't for me, take it. If this isn't your will, shut the door. If this isn't my season, I'll wait. That's maturity, that's trust, and that kind of trust is the soil where breakthrough takes root. Sometimes you're waiting on God to do something, and He's waiting on you to release something. Maybe it's your timeline, maybe it's your need to understand, maybe it's your fear of failure. But whatever it is, as long as you're holding it tight, you're blocking the very thing you've been praying for. Release is not a passive act. It's a spiritual transaction. You give God your worry, and He gives you His peace. You give Him your disappointment, and He gives you new vision. You give Him your timeline, and He gives you divine alignment. We keep asking for the new while clinging to the old, but God can't fill hands that are already full. He won't pour new wine into old wineskins. So sometimes the reason the breakthrough hasn't come yet isn't because He's not able. It's because you're not ready. Not because He's withholding, but because you're still holding. In the moment you release, heaven responds. The chains start falling, the fog starts lifting, the doors start opening. Not because of your effort, but because of your surrender. Breakthrough often begins with a decision you make in private. The decision to trust when everything in you wants to panic. The decision to praise when everything around you says to quit. The decision to stop fighting in your flesh and start resting in your faith. That decision may not look dramatic on the outside, but in the spirit it shakes things. Because when you release control, you're declaring that God's way is better than yours. And that declaration carries weight in the kingdom. There's a difference between releasing something and giving up. Giving up is rooted in despair. Releasing is rooted in faith. It says, I'm not quitting. I'm trusting. It says, this doesn't have to go my way for God to still get the glory. And that posture attracts breakthrough. Because God responds to humble hearts, He draws near to those who say, even if I don't understand, I still believe. Even if I don't see the outcome yet, I'm still standing on your word. We don't always realize how tightly we're holding on. We're holding on to people, plans, timelines, images of success, and those things become heavy. They become idols, and the breakthrough gets delayed, not because God is distant, but because our hands are full. But when you release it, when you truly lay it at His feet, something shifts. You move from burden to freedom, from anxiety to rest, from doubt to confidence. And it's not because the situation instantly changes. It's because you change. Breakthrough doesn't require you to be perfect. It just requires you to be open to a different outcome, open to a better plan, open to a healing that doesn't look like you expected, and that kind of openness only comes through release. The tighter you hold it, the more it controls you. But when you surrender it, you make space for God to move how He wants, when He wants, and through whatever way He chooses.